Today we're removing the Yamaha air injection system, or AIS, from the XVS 650. The air injection system is an emissions control device, so it doesn't affect the performance of the bike, it doesn't affect the power of the bike. There are two reasons why people remove the AIS from their bike. The first, quite simply, is cosmetic, because there's a big ugly box at the front of the 650 and there are pipes running all around the engine, which just doesn't improve the look of the bike. So if you want a simpler, cleaner look, then you can pull the system off. The other is when you have a slightly more tuned bike or a bike with a more free-flowing exhaust on it, i.e. not the stock. Perhaps you remove the baffle or something like that. And what you will get is you get a lot of popping and banging, especially on the overrun. The popping and banging tells you that the AIS system is working as it was designed to. If you don't have enough oxygen present, the fuel doesn't burn completely, and on the exhaust stroke gets pushed out into the exhaust pipe. Now, the exhaust pipe is hot enough to ignite the fuel, but without oxygen it can't, and that's what the AIS system does. It injects fresh air, which includes oxygen, into the exhaust header, and that allows the fuel to burn. But the side effect is you'll get popping and banging as that fuel explodes within the exhaust pipe. So how do we remove it? Well, it's really quite simple. What you've got is you've got an air injection box which has a filter in the bottom and a little pump, and then you've got some tubing that runs around into the cylinder heads. And all we need to do is to disconnect the tubing, block up the ports that it's plugged into, and remove the box. So let's start by showing you what it is and where it fits. Down here by the gear lever is the air injection system, and it's this black plastic box here. So in the bottom of this there's an air filter, and this top round section is the air pump. Back here there are two tubes. One leads to the front cylinder, the other leads to the rear cylinder, and down in here there's some little reed valves, which means that the air only goes this way. It can't come back from the exhaust through into this box. Also here there's a tube in the middle that runs up here, and this is the trigger. This is connected to the inlet manifold on the front cylinder, so when you get a vacuum coming through here, when it's sucking air in, that change in pressure comes down through this pipe and triggers the air pump here. So what we're going to do is to block off this pipe and block off each of these. Now these connect at the front and the rear of the bike, and what they do, as you can see, is they come up here and they go through between the cylinders and then they split out. This means they're both the same length because there's only a single trigger. Let's have a look on the other side. So here you've got the air cleaner, and under that the pipes come out, and you can see them here. So there's one here and there is one that comes through here and runs up there. At the rear of the bike, this is the tube coming up here, and it comes into this connector. So this is a connector that we're not really going to be able to remove easily, so we're just going to take this pipe off and block it. And you can see it's just held on by a Jubilee clip, and when we undo that, that holds a clamp on that Jubilee clip, and there's a rubber seal inside that that forms an airtight seal. So that's all we're going to do, is undo this, drop that off, block that up. It's a 12mm tube here, so we're going to use a 12mm fitting to seal that off. The front's a bit harder to see, but again we've got the pipe. It comes along here, it comes up and it connects into here. So again there's a small Jubilee clip that we're going to remove. The feed pipe comes up between the two silver tubes here and dives up here under the fuel tank. It connects here and there's a clamp. It's the same clamp as we have here on the pipe, so it just needs to be clipped together and then just worked back. Now you could block it here, but then you'd have this piece of pipe kicking around, so it's better to actually do it at source. This pipe has sat under the engine for a number of years. It's probably got very hot, and there's a very good chance that it doesn't want to come off. So you can see I've now worked that along the pipe, so it's now clear of the nipple here. You might find that this is hardened up and you'll actually have to just cut it here and cut it here and peel it off, but I'm hopeful, given this is a relatively low mileage bike, that it hasn't hardened up. So just getting some tension on the tube with the pliers and trying to ease the end of the pipe away from the engine. It's coming, but it's not happy, and it's probably going to take a while. There we go. Just needed that little bit of extra leverage to get in there. I measured this pipe here that clamps these two together, and it came to 6mm. So I went online to a car parts supplier and I bought a 6mm interior sealed end. They use these for blocking off ports on carburetors and this sort of stuff. So what I should be able to do now is to cut this down, slip that over there and clamp it on with the clamp. It turns out this pipe is slightly smaller. This is a bit oversized. It's more like 5mm down on the shaft there, so it's a little bit smaller than this tube between. So the 6mm cap was too big, way too big, not going to work. So I bought one with a 4mm internal diameter, and that fits really well. I think it'll hold there on its own. If you wanted, you could just put a little zip tie, small zip tie on there to squeeze it tight to prevent it pulling off. I may do that, but bear in mind the inlet manifold, it's all negative pressure. It's trying to pull the cap on, rather. It's not trying to push the cap off, but probably safe just put a zip tie on it anyway. And this is what it looks like installed. Forgive the shaky cam here. And what you'll also notice is I need to replace those inlet manifolds because they're starting to crack through. So there's another job that needs doing, but that's a nice seal. So on the rear cylinder we've got a 6mm hose clamp here. Coming around the other side of the bike, although it's loose on the connector, the pipe is just bouncing up and down because it's held on this point here. So we'll just remove that. And that gives us the room we need to pull that connector free. And with that disconnected, we can run the bolt back into here. I'm just going to snug it up. Coming back round to this side of the bike, we can see that this is nice and clean and this is a bit rusty, so I'm just going to get in there and clean that up a bit. Now, in an ideal world, we would remove this from the port, but it would be difficult to do. So it's easier, not quite as pretty, to leave it sealed. Should you actually get to the point of being able to get to the head, then it might be worth pulling them out when you're doing that. Now to seal this up, I'm using a plumbing fitting. Now this is perhaps a little steampunk, and you could probably find something else, but it's an effective way of sealing it up. And because it's all metal, the fact it's here right next to the hot exhaust on a hot cylinder head won't cause any problems. So the way these work is that you've got a hollow plug, so the nut goes on there, there's a copper olive that goes onto the pipe, and this is what provides the seal, and then that sits in there like that, and in the top of that nut there's a cone, and that cone provides the seal here. Now I'm going to use a little bit of black silicone here just for a little bit of extra sealing. Doesn't really need it, but it just allows, if there's any misalignment, then it'll allow it to seal better, and secondly, it in itself is a sealant, which I've used on exhaust before. It's quite a high temperature sealant. A bit messy, this one. And then we can simply assemble. Don't over tighten this, you're dealing with brass and copper here. They're both very soft metals, so get it tight, but don't really wham it on there, because you're just going to strip the brass threads out. So on the front cylinder we're doing exactly the same again. So with that bolt removed, so tight, not over tight. Just nip that up. We've now disabled the AIS system for removal. If you just wanted to disable it and leave it in place, all you've got to do is disconnect that feed tube from the inlet manifold, the single rubber pipe. Don't need to do anything else. Once you've disconnected that and preferably capped the inlet manifold, avoid air going in, so you must cap that, or you could just cap the tube further down, it doesn't matter. Once that is capped, the AIS stops working, because it's triggered by pulses from the inlet manifold. Stop those pulses, system stays off. If you needed it for emissions purposes but wanted to avoid the sound issues from the popping and banging, all you need to do is remove that one pipe. Since we've now disabled it, this would be the time to take the bike out, check everything works, check you're completely happy with the way it's running, and if you want to proceed with the full removal, first thing we want to do is just to pull the air cleaner off to give us a little bit of extra room to get those pipes off. But now we've got plenty of room to actually get in here. Now what we've got is we've got a clamp just here that we need to remove. It's a little difficult to actually get the camera in there, but you can see I've put the Allen key in there. So we just want to break this free. That was a bit tight. So that's what we want to remove. And with that disconnected, it's easier just to remove the clamps so that we can actually pull these pipes out of the rubber tubes, because otherwise it's going to be quite difficult to get these sort of curved pipes out of the way. Although we don't actually need to, we might as well put the bolt back in to the cylinder here. Oh, you could leave it out, but the hole would just get full of rubbish. Right, so now we can put the air cleaner back on. I've just loosened this bolt up so this clamps will go back on there more easily, and you can see here this spike here goes through there, and that's pretty much all that holds this on. So with the bolt here loosened, we need to slide this back on. So if you get your hand behind there, because that isn't really attached to anything, get that firmly on. That still needs to be on there reasonably tight, because otherwise you'll get an air leak here into the carbs. So get your spike lined up, and then you can put the bolts back in place. And snug them up. And that's us done for now with this side of the bike. On this side of the bike we can carry on removing the pipework. So again, we've got to remove this mounting screw. Air feed pipe won't remove quite so easily. So we have a but we can unclip it. And now we can remove these. In fact, it might be easier to remove them at the tops here. I think it'll slide off the chrome easier than it will off the alloy down here. This one's a little bit trickier to get to. go. So remove that, and wow, that is so much cleaner. Definitely cosmetically much better. Of course, if emissions controls are something that you are regulated on, this probably doesn't really work for you, so you're going to lose the cosmetic side. But now we can come down to actually removing the control box itself. There are 3 bolts that hold this front cover on, one here, and one down here, and this lower one is a little bit awkward to get onto without actually removing the foot peg. You might end up having to do that. This is just a plastic cover, so it's not really held on that tightly. This is where many people actually struggle with the AIS removal, is in removing this unit. The pipework's okay, and we've completely disabled the system, but cosmetically we want this lump gone as well. So we can remove the cover. So it looks like I am going to have to remove the footrest to get to this one, because there are 3 screws that hold the air pump in place here, and that holds it onto the bracket behind. The only way you're going to get onto the bottom one is to actually remove the footrest here. And for me, because I've got this crash bar on here, I'm going to have to take a little bit of extra work, because I need to take this off as well as the lower mounting, and normally it's just held on by the lower. Now with the crash bar removed, which just hides these 2 bolts, there are 2 bolts here, holds the footrest on, 2 14s, so we just unbolt them. And that allows us just to drop this down here. Be careful with your actual gear change rod here. You might want to just keep it out the way like that, so it's not placing any strain. And this allows us into this unit here. There are 3 bolts hold this to the bottom engine mounting bracket. This one, and this one. Now bear in mind, this is a Japanese bike, so although the heads aren't marked, they will not be Phillips. People with these bikes struggle with removing screws, and I suspect a large part of the reason they struggle is because they are trying to use a Phillips screwdriver on a JIS head, and it never ends well. Now I've already put some penetrating fluid on the back a week or 2 ago, just to give myself a head start, because the ends of these screws project out into where all the salt and dirt from the front wheel is hitting against the front of the engine. So take your time and work them free. Don't be afraid to put some more penetrating fluid on the back. Now I've heard of people having to cut these screws free, which seems an awful lot of work, especially if the major problem is that you're not using the right screwdriver. So I'm going to get penetrating fluid and squirt up behind there again, and I'm just going to work these backwards and forwards, having double checked that the screws are actually moving and the back end, and putting some more lubrication on, we can see that we are free on all of the screws now. So we just have to get those corroded threads through that bracket. Now I'm using my largest JS screwdriver here, which actually is the correct fit. I started off with this one, which was a mistake because it slipped in the threads, and that's when I realised that I had the wrong one. You can feel the corrosion on the threads bind up. Now I'm alternating between them to make sure there's no heat build up, because there's a lot of friction involved in dragging threads through. And this is a slow process, so don't try and force it, because you don't really want to shear the bolts off if you can avoid it. So get the right screwdriver, and take your time. If you put your hand around the back, you can feel the screws moving. So just to double check you are on the right ones. Yeah, I've definitely got the right ones. I can feel the end of the thread moving with my finger. Right, after a lot of hard work and backwards and forwards, that's the third bolt out. I think I might have bent it, putting too much force pushing it in. And that means we can remove the final piece of the puzzle. And now that really does clean up the front of the engine. But there's one more small task that we can do. It's optional, you don't have to do it. But if you're picky, it's something you might want to do. Right. The final job, and that's to replace this engine mounting bracket here. You don't need to, but it does look a bit odd sitting there as it is, because you've got this big lug sitting up here, you've got a hole here, you've got another hole here with a lug sticking out. Now you could cut this off, cut that off, you could weld up that hole, or even just cutting those off would probably be enough. Nobody would probably really notice it at first glance. But it is simple to replace, and you just replace it with the same one that's on this side. I'm going to unbolt this, take it off, bolt the new one in. So for here, you've got a long bolt runs through both brackets and goes through the engine. It's got a 14mm at each end, and on this side you've got two bolts that are 10mm. Now I've just loosened these off, but I did spray them and leave them for a few days beforehand, so they should come out nice and easily. Famous last words. And there we go. So, old bracket out. New bracket. I actually bought this from Yamaha. I'm just going to clean these threads up on these bolts, and then we'll bolt them in. We can now get this back in. And it really is that simple, and it does make such a huge cosmetic difference. and that's it. Bracket is now done. Now I just need to rebuild this end of the bike and put my crash bar back on. Putting it back together is simple enough. It's just a little bit fiddly getting this all in the correct orientation. AIS removal is a really simple job. The most difficult part by far is getting the screws out of the AIS unit, so I really do recommend that you get some lube on the back end of those screws. Try and clean them up if you can get a wire brush in there beforehand. Give that time to soak in. Any little edge that gives you will help. Other than that, really straightforward job. I do recommend that you do it the way I've described. Plug the ports first, check everything works, and then take it out. I also say that if you just want to disable it, just remove that pipe from the inlet manifold and plug the inlet manifold. Maybe double over the top of the tube and just zip tie it closed so that no contaminants get inside it. Don't do anything else. You don't need to remove pipes, connect pipes, or any of that. All you need to do is to remove the pulse trigger from the unit. Without that trigger, the AIS doesn't work. So there's no point in doing anything more, and that will allow you to quickly and easily reconnect the system if and when you need to. But with it removed, visual impact is huge. It looks an awful lot better, so I'm glad I've done it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.